Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining AIGA Raleigh's Fireside live stream series. The intent for this series is to have conversations with cool people doing cool things in the creative realm. Not knock over my microphone. There's a lot of interview style podcasts out there, a lot of other live streams and things like that that cover a myriad of topics on the business side of things, the inspiration side of creativity, and the whole nine. And frankly, they do it a lot better. So what our intent for this specific live stream series is to dig a little bit deeper into the individual who we're chatting with's origin story, right? So how these creatives got their spark and in turn kept it going. So I'd like to introduce this month's guest, Lauren Hom. She's a magnificent designer and illustrator, currently based in New York, right? Am I still right with that?
Detroit, actually.
Detroit, okay.
Yes.
I'm a little out of date. But I met Lauren recently at the Creative Works Conference, heard you speak, took your workshop, and immediately knew that we had to find some way to collaborate. So this is what worked out with our schedule.
Oh my gosh, schedules.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
thanks for having me.
yeah, for sure. I'm glad we were able to find some time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, for 2019, my speaking circuit is already so crazy, and I've had to find, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, like this fine balance between what is the perfect amount of travel per month to keep myself productive and excited and inspired without feeling drained. It's hard.
I used to work for a consulting firm, and that was the one thing I never envied was they left Sunday night and came back Thursday, afternoon every week on client site. And if I'm traveling for a week, even going for fun, by the time I get back, I'm dead. I need another week just to transition back into my schedule. I just got back from New York, visiting my grandmother yesterday, and I'm just now I just caught up with email a half an hour ago. Yep. I'm done. So anyway, but let's get right into it. So to start, if you were explaining what you did professionally to a 5-year-old, right? An imaginary child, obviously, how would you describe it?
I make words pretty for a living. It's actually kind of funny because I feel like on a semi-weekly basis, I explain to different Uber and Lyft drivers who have no creative backgrounds what exactly I do, and I kind of parse it down to kind of like that. Not like I draw pretty words, but I'll always say something like, "Oh, I illustrate words," or "Do you know what calligraphy is?" And I just whatever the most non-creative association is, I try to go for that.
Yeah, and it's hard because the designer and creative are such a catch-all that people don't understand there's divisions within it. And it's
creative
all that stuff.
Creative's the new blanket term for anything.
Which is, I think it's a cool title to have, but it's also all right, so but what do you really do? Especially when you're talking to creatives, so you do work digital, or is it marketing, or do you do lettering or something? What's your niche? That's funny.
Yeah, for sure. I always tell people that my niche is it's hard because there's so many applications for my work. I started off doing a lot of advertising and editorial, and now I was joking with my agent the other day that I still do the occasional editorial piece, but social and digital content has been my new editorial in terms of budget and turnaround. It's we need it in 48 hours, and we have $2,000, and that's just the new editorial. It's like doing a magazine cover or something.
Yeah. Well, that actually leads me into something I wanted to ask you about. So I imagine most people know you best from your side projects and your Instagram, insanely creative feed and the homework stuff and all that stuff. But I think part of, for those who haven't heard your story, a lot of these accidental side projects have turned into lines of business, right? So I think what's interesting to me is to talk to people who have a habit of monetizing their hobbies, right? Mm-hmm. What is it do you do, or how do you find time to play, right? Where it's just straight up exploration, if you're just trying to get back to whether it's the roots on something or learn something new, how do you individually take away the work side of it? I mean, is it something that's creative? Is it something that's very much dry, so you're not using that side of your brain? What is it for you?
I totally went through kind of not a mini crisis earlier this year about that. So my brain, just because for those of you watching who don't know kind of my origin story, I went to school for advertising for 4 years and got a job at an ad firm as an art director right at school. And I think coming from that 4 years of being primed as find ideas, cool ideas for brands to sell brands products, my brain just naturally thinks that way. The one technique that our ad teachers gave us that really stuck with me, and I don't think it'll ever leave me, is whatever your product is, whatever the value like prop is of the product, what is like the human truth behind it? Can you attach it to something that is true about being a human, or true about like things that people can relate to? And so some of my best ideas that have been monetized, like not on purpose, I guess, have been from like living my life. And you heard me speak at Creative Works, but a lot of it was from like getting drunk with my girlfriends, going through a breakup, like pretty mundane stuff, I would say. And I honestly base most of my passion projects on just stuff that happens in my everyday life. Like I like food and I like drawing, and I'll just combine something like that. To turn my brain off though, I was telling my assistant the other day, she was like, when was the last time you didn't monetize something? And when was the last time you didn't post something on Instagram? And I was like, oh shit, like since I got on Instagram, maybe, because I've launched, I think I have 9 passion projects, or like 8 of them by now. And it's hard because it's a lot to manage. Like, oh, if you looked at like how many domain names I owned, it's just ridiculous. I mean, really, I don't know why I'm paying for them. It's like a mini investment. But yeah, and I realized, my ad brain never quite turns off, which has served me well. I would not be where I am today if my ad brain wasn't always kind of in the background being like, that's funny, like that could be a personal project. Because my background in selling products for people, I just flipped it around and started selling stuff for myself, selling things that like I liked to make, and I knew how to package it up. So I have that background. But so the kind of the story of how I learned, or have been trying to learn how to chill out, is I was making some pom-poms and turned them into some earrings. And as I was making the pom-poms, it was just something I was interested in, and I watched some YouTube tutorials. As I was like trimming them, I was like, oh, I could totally sell these. And within 15 minutes of starting making pom-poms, I had purchased the domain name hompoms.com, which is
fantastic.
it's a great URL, I know. But then I was like, oh, I think I have a problem. Like, I want to monetize something the second I have the idea. And it's not a bad thing, but it also means my business brain is always on, even when my creative brain is on. And so my kind of hack has been to try to work on projects lately that are so time consuming that it would just not make like sense to monetize them. Like, I actually have it next to me right now. I've been working on this. I've been hand painting a dress.
Fireside exclusive.
Yeah, I went to the thrift store and I got this cute little blue linen dress, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna buy some fabric paint. So I've been hand painting. Let me see if I can get it up close. Hand painting this very intricate pattern on this dress. It's like I'm already 20 hours in, and there's just no way I'm ever gonna sell something like that. And it's also been kind of nice to keep it a secret. I feel like I'm kind of keeping a little creative secret from the world, because with social media now, there's just a tendency to share anything and everything. And it's not a bad thing, but like you were saying, like, when do you take the time to just kind of turn your brain off or let yourself play, when your brain is always thinking of it in a marketing sense, or how many likes is this going to get on Instagram? And so that's what I've been doing lately. But yeah, historically, I've had a hard time just turning it off, but it's been good because I've got my best ideas, not from sitting down and being like, okay, I'm going to think of an idea and start a passion project. The ideas come organically from me always kind of having my, like, I guess, detective hat on while I'm living my life, while I'm drinking with friends, while I'm like going to the grocery store. And I think that's the advice I've given to all of my students and friends over the years, is just kind of always have it running on autopilot in the background. Like, if there's anything interesting, anything that makes you laugh, anything that keeps coming up in conversation, maybe make a mental note of it. And that can be a good guiding factor into where you should make a project, or where you should take your work for fun.
Yeah. Do you find, so I find myself like, I started keeping a notebook on all times. So I never did it for a long time. And I was always like, no, I don't need to carry that thing. Like, that's just a weird thing to kind of carry around. And then I realized, like, once I started doing it, it got it out of my head. So I would stop kind of thinking about it. But then I realized, like, I have stacks of notebooks with just like half-baked ideas, or just like stuff where like, all right, this is how I'm going to do it. And I would write down like everything, and then it's like, it's ready to roll. And I just either don't finish it, or it just sits there, which I think in part is like a healthy exercise, right? Because it's like getting it out of the head. But on the same note, it's like, do you find yourself like with a bunch of just stuff that you're like, well, I could have finished this, but it's okay that I didn't, but like, like half opened, bags of chips kind of concept, where it's just like, you got all this stuff open and like sitting?
Yeah, 100%. I have like a little sticky note in my, not like an actual sticky note, but the stickies on my like MacBook, with just like half-baked ideas. And some of them are clever and good. And I think in my list of ideas, there are kind of different tiers. So there are ideas where I have them and I feel that like, oh my gosh, I have to make it right now. I sit down and I just power it out in the week. Like I'll just feel so excited about it that I make it happen.
Right.
And then there are those ideas that make me laugh and are funny and I might talk about with my friends for like a couple months, but never actually pull the trigger on. And I figure that those ones are, maybe better off as like ideas for a singular Instagram post, or I can kind of pare it down to make it more feasible in the future. I think I haven't really given much thought to whether or not I finish an idea, because I historically, if I want to make something happen, I'll make it happen. And for me, I need the excitement about the idea
Yeah.
and like the instant action in order to see something through. If I let something sit there for a while, I just won't be like as excited to work on it. And like, even if I know that I should, if I don't want to, I just won't do it. I've been reading lately, I started reading Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and she has a really good, it's about creativity, a really good like view on like ideas and creativity. And she views it as ideas are like living little organisms. Not that they are, but they come and they find artists and creators to make them. And if you don't pick up your pen or pick up, your paintbrush or whatever and make the idea, it will leave and it will go to somebody else. And I never really thought of it that way, but it's kind of true. Like, so like an idea can kind of just knock on your door and you might feel called to it, but maybe not called enough that you want to actually do something about it. And it might go find someone else. Because have you ever, I don't know if anyone's watching or anyone, or maybe you've had an idea for something, written it down in one of your many notebooks, but then like 6 months later, you see someone else doing it and you're like, that was my idea, but I never did it.
That's so funny. You're like, oh, that's exactly how I was going to do it too. Today, have my notebook. Like how? That's so funny. And that's an interesting idea. Like that it kind of floats through the atmosphere, kind of thing, and like latches on. And if it doesn't, because I mean, that would totally explain why so many of my billion-dollar ideas, I don't own them anymore, kind of thing.
Exactly.
I think it's an interesting like tidbit, because I think all the new studies into like mental health and how creativity like influences it. I mean, they're saying more and more than, we already knew because we do it all the time, but it's almost like a form of like self-care, right? Just even making, whether it's like doodling something quickly or carrying through the project that we're interested in, or even like that final home stretch on like an actual work project. So I think it's really interesting that like the idea of it being something that's almost conditional to like, you have to capture the moment while it's there, but not with the pressure of like, you have to finish it because you owe it to this person. Mailman's here.
Oh. That's so cute. Hi, everybody who's watching while Taylor takes a little dog break.
Hello.
Welcome back. Hey, at least you have a good guard dog. Oh, I see a tail, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right there. My mailbox is right outside my front door, and normally they come at like 6:30, so it's fine. But I guess he's running a little late today. But
it's the dog, like, holiday rush.
Let me know, but that's okay. Anyway,
where were ideas, making stuff?
Idea transitions, but
that momentum is really, really good. And kind of like what I was saying earlier about like my most successful passion projects have just kind of the ideas have resulted from just real life scenarios. I don't beat myself up if I have an inclination to like, so the other day I was like, okay, like with this dress, I was going to embroider it instead. And then I decided, I bought the embroidery kit and everything and started like doing a little sample. And like an hour in, I was like, fuck this. Like, I don't like embroidery.
Yeah.
And I gave myself permission to say, you know what? Like, I'm glad I followed it down the rabbit hole. This can be executed a different way, or maybe I'll abandon it completely. I think that, indulging the ideas is important. Obviously, some follow through is important, but that's why I think that relying on your intuition and your excitement levels like has worked for me, because I feel less bad about abandoning the maybe 50 or 60 or even 70 percenters that I'm like excited about for a second. And then I'm just like, because what's the point of working on a project where halfway through you start dragging your feet on it? If it's personal work, it should be fun, because we have our work to like have our deadlines and have our like have to do's. I think with personal work, you should lean very heavily into the like, what do I actually want to do? But then I'm sure some people would argue that depending on what your craft is, so something like sign painting or calligraphy, where you actually are practicing more muscle memory. Like there probably is some merit to the actual just like drills and practice and less creative, more just like muscle stuff. But I don't know. It's what's worked for me.
Yeah, no, because I think part of it, you're right. I think there's two parts to that creative brain, right? You've got the work and then the work, right? The stuff you can enjoy, and then there's the stuff that like you really just need to finish to pay the bills, whatever. And I think it's the same, probably a little more intense for those who don't have full-time jobs, right? Because you really have to draw the line on where and when you're going to start and stop something when you're managing yourself. Yeah. But I think even for people that have like in-house positions and stuff, or even like at an agency or whatever, having I remember there's plenty of time where I would come home from work and it's like I wanted to do this thing and I'm just so beat. Like I spent all my like creative juice and then I'm like bummed out. I'm like, well, I really wanted to come home and do it, but there just wasn't that excitement that we were just talking about. Like there isn't that anymore. And it makes you wonder, is it the project that's bumming me out, or is it like the fact that I'm spent for the day, which is totally okay?
It's probably a mix of the two, but I would lean towards the latter. Like I was at Adobe Max last year and there was a panel and Questlove was on it and they're talking about creativity. And he said something that I absolutely loved. I've been trying to incorporate it into my life. And I think this might be valuable for you and anyone else watching, but the idea of like making time and making space, and he kind of formatted it as like quiet time. He was like, our lives are so busy and we're so connected and we're on our phones and we're on social media and we're always just kind of on that we never allow the quiet space and like the breathing room for ourselves to like hear the ideas and like let them talk to us. And I was like, whoa, it's so true. Like even when you're mindlessly browsing Instagram or like listening to a podcast, like you have a stream coming in already. You can't necessarily hear the ideas. And so he and the other panelists were talking about, all of them do this, like prioritizing, like allowing yourself for that time to be excited. So some downtime. And it's really hard when you see, I think, kind of like the modern day keeping up with the Joneses, right? Like we're on our phones looking at all the awesome shit that everyone else is doing. And we're like, I'm not doing enough awesome shit. And so we ramp up production, whether that's at work or on the side, and then we burn out, and then, we kind of fizzles out. And so I think that it's tough. I've had projects that are more slow burns and then I pull the trigger. It's been hard for me. I'd say historically, most of them have been impulsive. But for me, one thing I didn't take into consideration as my business has grown and my work has become more in demand, and now that I'm teaching and stuff, I was launching about two passion projects a year with no like issue running them until the last 2 years when I realized like, oh shit, like I'm just a lot busier now because of my passion projects. And maybe I can't launch 2 in a year. Maybe I have to do one every other year, or just more projects that are more realistic with my schedule now.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting to when you've got so much time, or sorry, not enough time to get the many things done. It's like you almost don't appreciate when you've completed something, right? It's like because you're pushing on to the next piece, whether it be the next project or the next piece of a bigger project or whatever. So tease up the next question. What is so different people in the span of a project's deadline, right? Whether it be the initial like concepting, whether it be sketching or web or whatever it is, to the actual, handing off the files. Like when in that process, question number one is, when in that process do you feel most comfortable, right? So is it that initial, part, or is it like doing the work or whatever, right? And then part two of that is there a time or a feeling or something where you, like when the project's handed off, like do you look for something in the client or in the reception of the work to know, like, you know what, I nailed that, right? Like, is it an aha moment with you? Is it something they say? So first is like, where are you in that scale of like, you're in most comfortable, right? Whether it be communicating or doing the work. And then how do you then translate that into like that, I crushed this project, or, did the best I could do or whatever, where's that come from?
So the first part of the question, I would say that I am the most comfortable when I'm actually creating the work. I do get I think a bit of excitement when I get briefed on a project, like the possibilities are endless. Oftentimes though, like once you're briefed and then you get like all the other parameters, you're like, oh, okay, like some projects are just more straightforward, and I'm okay with that. There are some projects that it's not going to be like a portfolio stunner piece. It's just a thing that you can do, and maybe it's a good project fee, and maybe you've got some free time. It doesn't always have to be like, you know, the thing that you're going to be brilliant with. There obviously are certain projects, I think, where you should take advantage of like a really open brief and like a cool client, and you could do some cool like creative work that you could enter into award shows. So yeah, doing the actual work is probably when I'm the most in the zone. I think it's pretty textbook. Well, early on in my career, I used to get briefed and like have the finished piece in like 2 days, even if the deadline was like 2 weeks. I was just so excited. My sketches weren't even sketches. I would basically just do 3 versions of the full thing, which was not a really good use of my time, but I was fresh and I was excited, and I overshared just so my ideas wouldn't be misconstrued or like misunderstood by the client in black and white sketches. Now I realize that sketches are fine. But as I've gotten maybe more comfortable with what I'm doing, I definitely like get into my best flow towards the end phase of the project, like crunch time, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Like when there's 3 or 4 days left before something's due, like, and the pressure starts or the clock starts to like tick down, that's when I get into the best flow. And then in terms of like knowing when I crushed a project, I think for me, it's mostly come internally. Just because over like the last 5 years I've been doing this, I've gotten like so much different types of feedback from my work from different people, and everyone's got like a slightly different opinion on like what's my best piece and like what's my best work. And I think that for me, it's like it's just kind of a gut feeling. If I make something and I'm like, that's really cool. I think it's internal because I just kind of assume that clients are going to be, I've never had a mean client though. I was going to say like people are generally pretty like sweet and like flattering online and like via email. And especially if it's like a client who's like been like waiting to work with me for a while. And so I always take it with a grain of salt. I was talking with someone, oh my gosh, who was I talking with? Oh, I was talking with a new friend that I met here in Detroit the other day about this idea of, I think we were talking about stoicism, and then it kind of turned into when you attach a lot of like your like success to hold on, this is a very complex thought. I need to break it down. Oh yeah, so it's like feeling bad about your work. When you have a failure or something doesn't go the way you want, you always say like, oh, like it was a personal failure, like something about me and my skill and my talent like fell short, therefore like I suck, because that didn't go the way I wanted it to. And so when we attach ourselves like to the outcome, or like in a positive sense, like when you do something well, or you win an award, or you get a lot of likes on an Instagram post, you celebrate that and you feel really, really high, and you're like, I'm amazing, like this is the best. We were talking about this concept of kind of detaching yourself from, you know, you as a person are the sole source of your like success or your failures. And it actually helps to ease some of the blow, because it's hard with art, because I do think there's more of a blurred line between like you and your work. Like we feel like we are our work a lot of the times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we were just kind of like, you know, talking about philosophy and stuff. And we're just ended up talking about this idea of trying to detach yourself a little bit from like the great successes of your work, but also the great failures, because then the highs and lows are a little bit less intense. Because a lot of it, I think we were talking kind of about the randomness of success and like career stuff. And yes, a lot of it is hard work. And you could say that a lot of success or a lot of luck is basically just like hard work manifesting itself into that luck. But there also is kind of an element of like, who the fuck knows? Like when in a micro sense, like when you post on Instagram, you know, one of your posts might do exceptionally well and the other one might do super shitty. And then you feel personally bad about the post doing shitty, when it might not have really been your fault. Like you really don't know. And so as someone with a large Instagram audience too, I think this is why I was talking a little bit about that detachment with my friend. Like I've had to take a step back and not take it so personally, because my work is seen and shared and like liked on a bigger scale, that when the numbers fall, it feels like such a great loss, or it used to feel that way. So I had to kind of take a step back, because it's a weird like attachment. And I know we all have it to some extent with our work. And now that we can get instant feedback, or like, it's almost like people voting on your work with like Instagram. It's like, oh, that one got 90 and that one only got 60. So that one must have sucked. It must have been 30% worse. Like we can quantify it now. It's
absolutely.
not quantifiable.
And I think That's what bothers me most about that whole like the hustle mentality, right? It's like you have to grind nonstop to make it work, right? And it's hard because I think when you're a creative in any, no matter what your specialty is, right? It's not like something that you can turn on and turn off. It's not a tangible thing you can shut down, right? You can't close the door on the shop, so to speak, and be done for the day. And I think because creativity is such a powerful, like calming tool, right? It's at that point of like, okay, we work doing these things, we calm down doing these things, we explore doing these things, and you're just never stopping, right? And it's that whole like, you're then tying because that small project you were showing a friend then becomes this like thing that has all this weight and value where it really is like, it's not any more or less important than the other thing you were working on, right? And then it's like, how do you turn that off at any moment? And then, like, I find myself like going to restaurants and like looking at the menus and being like, oh man, this is bad. Like I can't, like my brain's always in that mode, or like, oh, I could see how this could have, would it be so much clearer if they had just done this? And I have to like physically be like, all right, shut the fuck up. Like they don't care. The restaurant's fine. The food's good. Like it doesn't matter, right? Turn it off. Don't take notes. Just to be able to like change into enjoying the moment that you're in, right? Whether it be creative or not. I think it kind of leans on that, the disassociation portion. Cause I think part of that is like, if you're stoked to post something or share a piece of work or whatever, you throw it up and you're like, hell, like I kicked ass on that. I enjoyed doing it. I learned all these new skills. I don't give a shit what 200 people think, about it. Like even if it gets 2 likes, like you have to be like, you know what? Like I mastered that thing. And even if I didn't get into it exactly like I wanted, I learned X, Y, Z and did all these other pieces and figured out my time spent and, or just enjoyed it, or whatever. But anyway, step off.
No, it's very, very true. Like it's so hard now because you can get that kind of instant. I guess it's like when your post does well, like you get that kind of like, what is it? The endorphin, is that what it is? Oh, your serotonin spikes or something. Serotonin. Yeah. But then when you don't get it, like it's kind of like a psychological drug, I suppose. But yeah, what was I talking? I was talking with that same friend about kind of like what you were talking about too, about being able to turn it off and sharing your work on Instagram. Oh, I was talking with my friend. I always forget his last name is Miller. Andy J. Pizza. Andy Miller. Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with his work.
Sure.
About Instagram and how from it's good to have some feedback on like numbers, like that quantitative, like 100 likes, 200 likes, this one got 300. It's good to have those metrics, but they cannot be the only metrics that you gauge your work or judge your work by. And he and I kind of came up with, we were just chatting on the phone. He and I came up with this kind of good like formula for how you should kind of judge that. And the number, like the posts that perform well, it's good to pay attention to that. And like maybe you are doing something different in that post that resonates with your audience. To play devil's advocate there, maybe you're not, maybe it was just a spike in like whatever hashtag you used or whatever. But if you do see patterns, we came up with what performs well for your audience mixed with how much you enjoyed making that thing. Are 2 good kind of sliders to use as to should you pursue more work in that area. Because if you hated making it, but it performed so well, you should probably not make a ton more of that work because you're going to burn out really, really fast.
Yeah, because it just becomes a chore at that point as opposed to something you're like enjoying working through.
Yes, but on the flip side of that, it's tough because like if you do the other way and you absolutely loved working on it, but it gets crickets from your audience consistently, maybe it doesn't have a commercial like viability,
which is
but it
fine.
Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you should like. I think what's interesting about like meeting you at Creative Works and all the conferences that I go to, most people are there to either get re-inspired or to learn more about making money with their art. Like this intersection of art and commerce is really, really cool and really, really powerful, but it also comes with this whole bag of like mixed emotions because it's so blended.
Right. It's like, there's that meme out there that's like, find a job you like and never work a day and, ever.
Oh, it's Adam JK. So funny. I have the sticker.
And the second one is like, but also be miserable because all you do is work, like, or whatever.
Yeah. He had one that, it said, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But he had crossed out the second part and it said, do what you love and you'll work really hard and have no boundaries and take everything extremely personally.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Oh, you're so right.
Yeah.
So funny. And it's so true though. I mean, it because the more and more like that these lines get blurred where you can just make stuff for fun and then make stuff and actually, and then like with all your passion projects, people just all of a sudden want to pay for it. And you're like, oh, well, I was just doing this for fun. And all of a sudden now, and then it's like, well, do I turn down this money people are throwing at me? Like, where does that fit in? And sometimes you got to be like, well, yeah, it's not worth the trouble of making, more of, but then sometimes it's like, well, there could be something here. And do you chance it kind of thing? But
absolutely. And that's the tricky thing too, is there are very few projects that I've done in my career, like passion projects, with the sole intention to make money. I did do a project like 3 or 4 years ago to try to raise money for like a trip I was taking. But other than that, that was it. Like everything else was pretty organic. After the first couple passion projects I launched, and I did see commercial success with it after the fact, obviously, you're not going to make money right away. People aren't going to be like, yes, I'd love to wholesale that poster that you made at like the day after you make it. But it's this mix of like a good creative idea and then like consistency. Like I think people forget about how important consistency is, and not in the sense of posting on Instagram every day. To be my business coach has this great phrase. Whenever I freak out about like not posting on Instagram enough, she'll be like, well, are you posting because you have something valuable to say to add to your audience's lives, or are you just trying to make noise? Are you just trying to like flare off your like fireworks, being like, hey, look at me, which is what a lot of Instagram is. And I did a lot of that at the beginning because it feels like what you have to do. But I think that, yeah, like with the stuff that I share now, I stopped beating myself up about it because I'm only going to post when I have something valuable. But back to the monetization thing, it comes much later. And when I teach my passion to paid class, or when I talk to people about passion projects that are a bunch of images curated under one theme or one idea, posted consistently, even if it's once a week for 52. I have a student who did a project where he only posted once a week, but for 52 weeks straight, a whole year. And he did really well with it because he set expectations with himself and his audience. He had a full-time job, so he did what was manageable, and it worked really well. And I think that not just consistency posting random stuff on Instagram, but consistency with an idea, not only does it help you practice and like work on a like big campaign, but it lets your audience get to know you. Like you get known as like that guy or that gal who does that thing. And It's really, really powerful because it helps you stand out. Like for a while, I was like the daily dishonesty girl, and I was totally cool with that. And I had a student who did a project about periods, and we were talking about it, and she was like, I don't know, like, I don't really want to be the period girl. And I was like, no, you do want to be the period girl just for a little bit, and then you pivot.
That's so funny. I think that the common thread to all that, I mean, you've mentioned it in multiple ways. It's just, I don't think we've I mean, most of that, it's consistency and then over time, right? I mean, that's the hardest part to swallow, because as wonderful as, and this is not a new argument, but like as wonderful as social media is, it's created this thing of like, we can get immediate feedback and at all times, right?
Like the fast food of creativity.
Exactly. You can like piecemeal and like shoot up things and quickly put up, things, get a lot of quick feedback, but at the same time, like in order to hone a skill, you got to do it for 6 months, a year, whatever it is, to get it to a point where you can even bother wondering, am I good at this? And it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing.
It's very, very true. Yeah. It's tough too. Cause I mean, I suffer from this as well, but hearing the business advice that like, find your niche, and knowing that, but then, and I did find my niche with lettering, but then also being like, but I also want to do these 12 things. Like, can I not do those 12 things? And so for me, it's been very much like the first 3 years of my career were 100% lettering, all lettering, until I got sick of it. And then because I had built such a strong base, like for my lettering and not just lettering, but my like ideas behind the projects I was doing, I could slowly expand into, some photos and some food and some travel stuff. And it felt, I think, less extreme than like doing one project and then completely pivoting away from it. I had done a lot of projects and built up a big enough audience where, I felt like established enough and well-known enough for what I did to be able to not make a complete 360. I wasn't doing like sports photography all of a sudden, but it was idea-wise kind of tangential. It was always like food, humor, travel, that kind of stuff. But then medium-wise, I was able to experiment a lot more. Yeah.
That kind of brings us back to the part of my I guess, core for this podcast, this
Yeah.
live stream. So you mentioned, you know, I mean, those who don't know your story, right? You started in ad school, you got sick of it because of the stress, you jumped out, did your own thing, you started these passion projects, you tackled lettering, and now you're doing anything and everything that comes to mind, right? So it's this like cool hybrid thing. So certain people, I guess, can pinpoint like a specific, I don't know, moment or person or thing they saw that either started them down like the creative as a career path from the get-go, like maybe what brought you to the ad agency thing, or what, you know, the pivoting factor that made you think, okay, I can do this on my own. You know, do you have one of those moments, either on the start, like when you're in grade school or something, that was just like, you know, I should forget about this history thing and I should go with the art, you know, kind of thing? Or was there like a moment like that?
I would actually say, so for how I got into art, I always loved art, and my parents are really great about letting me take lots of art classes and signing me up for camp and stuff where I could do creative stuff. It was only when I asked them if I could pursue it as a career that they were like, you might want to think about that one. And it's so funny that it's actually this week's homework prompt. It's so funny that people who have hesitations about being an artist as a career are not drawing from personal experience 95% of the time. They're just going off of what they've heard. And so they're well-meaning, but they haven't given it a try. Like, you know, they probably don't even know anybody who did it and failed, like, because we've all been scared off of just trying in the first place. So I actually found advertising because I wanted to do art, but I also needed to convince my parents that I was going to do something that had like some commercial viability. I was going to have career like stability, and like make a decent income. And so I had taken a couple like after school or weekend classes in high school. And I took an advertising class, and we had the internet at this point, and I was doing research on different salaries, and being an art director at an advertising agency paid well. And there was kind of this clear cut trajectory to like, you know, ACD, creative director, ECD, like all this stuff. And I was like, oh, advertising seems like one of these rare industries where if you work your way up, you can make six figures very easily, as opposed to, I'd actually say now, like traditional graphic design, you can still do that. But the agency world just seemed there were a lot more job opportunities, maybe because I was only looking at like boutique studios, and it only seemed to be like there were 3 designers working at a studio at a time. And I was like, oh no, there's only 12 design spots in the world. And so
this is it. What did I do?
So I went into advertising for the practical aspect of it, and I loved it throughout school. Actually, I was like a diehard like ad geek, and I would watch all like the award shows and like read all the annuals. It wasn't until I got to the professional world that I realized like, oh wait, these are real clients who can actually veto your ideas, and like, because when you're in school, you can make projects for Google, you can make projects for whatever brand you want.
Never gonna bother to tell you no.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how much they cost or if they're even feasible.
Yeah, you just throw it on a mock-up and you're done. Like, that's it. We did this bus line for, you know, Google because they deliver things now. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's how I got into the creative stuff, or into advertising. I had never stopped doodling on the side though. I've always loved to draw. I've never been particularly fantastic at like life drawing or like anything representational, but I would always doodle. And I picked up lettering after taking a typography class in college, and just like to incorporate it into my work. And there was a moment junior year that my teacher likes to joke with me about. Gail Anderson, who's like a fucking phenomenal graphic designer. She was my communication design teacher. And every year I would take one design class as like, not an elective, but just to break up my ad curriculum and hopefully add to my skills as an art director. And she pulled me aside like the third week of class, and she said, hey, I think you're in the wrong major. You should be a graphic designer. And I was like, hell no, I'm dedicated 3 years to ad. I am not backing out now.
It's so funny.
And she and I joke about it to this day, because now I'm more of a designer illustrator than an advertising person. And she was right. And so if one of the best graphic designers like in the game tells you should do something, you should probably do that. But I found my way eventually. And then I also had a aha moment. I think a lot of small ones while I was in the ad industry. I would see people like Jessica Hish and John Contino and Dana Tanamachi, Jeff Rogers, Dan Casaro. There seemed to be this growing number of people who were doing mostly type work, like their studio or themselves, the designers, were doing primarily type work. And that showed me kind of like a subtle example that like, oh, wait, you can do type as a living. Like there are people who are doing it. So like maybe I could do it. But I had still just like graduated college and needed to get a full-time job to like appease my parents. I also genuinely wanted to give it a try. Like the tricky thing, and you might have heard this in my talk, but I graduated college with a book deal for that blog I started in college. And I had $25,000 in my pocket and I was 23 years old and I could have just tried to freelance. I really could have. But I kind of wanted to try ad still. And I was still scared that like I wasn't going to make it. And I'm still glad I tried ad because I figured out that I didn't like it and I definitely didn't want to go back. My aha moment was, I think 7 months into the job, I had lunch with my friend, and I would say he's one of my mentors, Justin Genak. He runs the website Working Not Working, if anyone's familiar with it. Yeah, it's like a creative freelancing platform. It's really cool. He graduated from SVA and had spoken in my class, in my ad class early on, and we had connected a couple years later, and we had coffee, and I was telling him, because he's an ex-ad guy too, I was like, I can't, like, I hate advertising. Like, I don't think I want to do it anymore. I think I'm going to give this lettering thing a shot. But I'm going to stay at the agency for 5 more months just so I can get a year on my resume so it doesn't look bad. And he instantly gave me this perplexed look. And he was like, but if you don't want to work in advertising, what does your advertising resume matter? And I was like, ding, 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 ding. Like, whoa, that's so true. And it was just like a lot of, I bet you can tell, like a lot of my decision making kind of processes throughout my career have been very risk averse. Like they're very much based on what I thought I should do and what I was conditioned, like what my parents told me and what I thought was the right responsible thing to do. When I either had to learn the hard way or like have someone tell me something like that, like, oh no, like if you actually want to do that, that doesn't matter. And so you can just scrap that, even though, yeah, the general rule is you should keep, if you want to, it looks weird if you work for less than a job or less than a year, right? At a job. I don't know. I never.
The creative world is changing so much. I mean, you know, talk about 5-6 years ago, if you didn't hold a job for a year, it was like, oh, they clearly fucked up. Like you did something wrong enough that you had to leave at, 4 months or whatever. And now you find people, they're hopping around like every 3 months, either for contract work or even just in full-time positions, just to be able to explore. And it's like, all of a sudden it's okay. And I don't think it's in every industry, but I mean, with ours, at least it's not abnormal for it to happen, but it's weird for people, I think, in like this generation that's just like, all right, wait, all of a sudden this is okay. Like we were drilled in by our parents or whomever that was like, you have to, get a few years in or earn your rights or whatever. And now you can literally just like start doodling online and sell the shit. Like, and that's like a thing and it could be okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
New, avenue that just blew up out of nowhere. I think it owes back to I recently had a boss who told me, she was like, look, you can do anything for 1 year. Like cap it at that, like that's your construct. And I think it goes to say like, whether that means a full-time job somewhere in ad, or something you don't like, or it's lettering or going freelance. I think there's like just to circle back to what you're saying before. I mean, part of it's like, you just got to be consistent, right? And even if that means consistently breaking off with the things you don't like, I think there's a second side to that, because everyone's like, oh, put in the work, right? Do it. But also, if you're not enjoying it, or you're just really not improving, or someone's clearly telling you like, look, you seem to be just doing this because you have to, like, there's a moment that you got to be like, all right, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, and I think it's hardest to come to that realization yourself.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That was the hardest part for me. Like admitting to myself that I wanted to leave my job, because everything else I had been told about what you were supposed to do in your first year or first couple of years at an agency were kind of keeping me there. Like, oh, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be grueling. You're supposed to work 70 hours a week. Like you're supposed to keep your head down, put in your dues. And then in 10 or 15 years, you can be a creative director and like have that, sweet corner office with make like $200,000 a year, whatever it was that I was chasing, because that's what I thought. Like, that's what I thought success was when I was 21, leaving school. I was like, that's what I want. And kind of to piggyback off of what you were saying, I think readjusting at different times in your life too. You might hate something in your 20s and then all of a sudden in your 30s, like have a newfound appreciation for it. You never know. Like I think about a lot of the stuff that I had like written off earlier on, that like now it's like, oh, like I kind of get it. Like everything people tell you in your early 20s about what your late 20s are going to be like, you're always like, no way.
It's like vegetables. They're horrible when you're younger. And all of a sudden it's like, I'll take a, grilled avocado like right now. Like it's fine.
Yeah. And so I think that's what I think about too, is I never really know where my career is going to go, because I think my plan is to try to tailor my career around my like lifestyle and what I want for my personal life. Are you petting your dog right now? I see a tail on the corner. Yep. Oh my gosh. Oh, hello. Because my dad would always be like, well, are you gonna live in Detroit for 5 years, 10 years, 3 years? Are you gonna get married? Are you gonna have kids? And I really don't know. But I also know that if any of the 10 or 100 different ways my life could go happen, I'm sure my work will change because of it. If I become a mother in the next 10 years, my work is definitely going to change in the way I work, and maybe in the style or the theme of my projects. Who knows? And I'm sure it would be great. Like what I love watching Jessica Hish doing her children's book and all that stuff, because it's just a natural progression of what her life is about and what her expertise is in now. And I don't know very many people who have gone to like make children's book if they haven't been close to children themselves. Like, right. And it's just easier to make projects around the things that are currently in your kind of orbit. And I think that
care about them more. It becomes a passion at that point.
Makes my gosh, yes, absolutely. And so who knows what I'm going to be passionate about in the future. And people always seem a little shocked when I tell them, like, I don't know if I'm going to be lettering like my entire life. It's a skill that I have, kind of like what you were saying. Right. It's a skill that you can build up, and like it doesn't go away. You get a little rusty if you like don't do it anymore, but it's kind of, I think that creativity, and I view my career this kind of way too, is it's iterative. Like I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now or have had the kind of inner knowledge to make passion projects and make these kind of bite-sized pieces of content and package them up nicely and capitalize on them had I not had 4 years in advertising before that. And I ended up hating it, but it was like very, very integral to what I'm doing now. So I can't say that, I used to think it was all for nothing. The reason I told Gail, like, no, I'm not going to switch to graphic design, and the reason I still got a full-time job was because I felt like it was going to be a complete waste if I switched gears. But it never is. Like, if in 10 years I'm like a chef or something, I guarantee that my graphic design background will make me a better chef. Like, who knows?
Yeah. No, that's so funny. I think it parallels, like, so I was just recently having a conversation with someone, and it makes design into like a very fluffy thing. But I was trying to explain that, like, for someone who's not in the creative / design world, like, they're experiencing everything that's created, right? But if you look at from the design perspective, there's not a single thing you interact with on a daily basis, would be a cup, a computer, whatever, that a designer didn't touch, which makes like design in general this immensely powerful thing. But then, like, on the flip side, most of the time it's just like people like, oh, that color doesn't work, change it. Like it's the both sides of that spectrum, but it's that same weight where, like, at any time it can change, or you can change, and either you can still use all the things you've figured out and learned and picked up over time to get to wherever you're going, wherever that is. But that's interesting.
Yeah, and kind of like what we were talking about, I'm sure we could talk about this for like 8 hours, but what we were talking about earlier about like making work about the things that are close to you and like going on in your life. One thing that I've struggled with, and I think a lot of people I've talked to have struggled with, is turning everything that you're thinking about in your life or everything that's going on into a design project, or not knowing what to focus on. And I never thought about it until my late 20s when I started overthinking some things. It's so funny how like you're so irreverent and carefree in your early 20s, and I kind of miss some of that, and I'm trying to channel that back in of like being naive in like the best way, and like not knowing and not caring. Like I was able to launch so many good passion projects early on because I didn't really overthink it, and I wasn't trying to be a letterer. There were no expectations set. Now when I launch a project, I like, even if I say like, oh, it doesn't matter what's going to happen, like I set the bar already for myself. And
secretly you're checking the feed and looking at the online sales when, like, before you just like set it, we'll see what happens. Yep.
It's not that, like, because I was actually on Andy's podcast last year, and he and I were talking about, we came up with this kind of metaphor or analogy that I thought was really good at the time, but then I was like, oh wait, could that be dangerous? And then we were talking about Mario Kart and competition. and how you should be competing with your ghost, not with everybody else, but compete against your best time and try to beat yourself.
Sure.
And then I thought about it like 6 months later, and I was like, but you can't always like hold yourself to like your home runs. Like that also isn't good. You can't make yourself feel like a failure because of what you've previously achieved either.
Ooh.
It's just different. And so I don't know where I was going with that. Expectations. Mario Kart always throws off my
I think you're right. It kind of comes around. It's like, there's a certain, you should make goals, right? You should find time to explore. You should sometimes let those things crisscross, but you should also find boundaries that are comfortable for you where you can go, okay, I can just keep this in a sketchbook and not, bring it to a digital phase. Or, I can put together these Legos and not find a way to make Lego houses for sale. Like, it's okay. But on the flip side, if someone's like, maybe you should, it's like, well, then maybe explore it, and there's an okay balance between all of that. I think everyone, especially you talking about junior designers or fresh out of college folks, there's always the question like, how much should I charge? And it's the same question to this. It's like, well, when should I commit full to one thing or the other? And the answer is, I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer. Like, is it when there's a big following? Well, right now Instagram's hot, so maybe but is it more so when people are like throwing you money? Maybe, but also that could be a red sign that like maybe you need to slow down and think it through. There's no formula for this, whereas I think people expect. And as the more and more it becomes, I don't like the term, but the gig economy, where everything's like by project. I mean, you're not going to have the I guess complacency setting where you can say, okay, well, I know if I ride it out for 2 years, I'm going to get promoted to whatever and go to the next, which for some people is great. For some people that's scary, and I understand both sides of that coin. But on the same note, it's like that whole idea of just embracing the pivot, whether that means, doing what you're doing now, or it means exploring a new skill, or it means tag teaming with somebody to do something new, whatever that means to you. Just roll with it to a certain extent.
I love that. The embracing the pivot. It's very, very true. Because you're right. You never know what the next platform is going to be. You never really know. Also, there was one thing that my mom always told us when we were kids, not about design, because they didn't want us to be graphic designers, but we had a rule at the dinner table that it bled into a lot of the rest of my life. And my parents are fairly conservative, I would say, but this actually allowed me to like explore a lot more. And my mom would always say, because we know when you bring kids broccoli or anything green, basically, and they're just like, no, I don't like it. I don't want to eat it because of their preconceived notion of what a green vegetable tastes like. My mom would always say, it's okay if you don't like it, but you can't tell me you don't like it till you try it. So just try a bite. And like, if you don't like it, you don't have to eat it. And like half of the time it would be fine. Like there are some green vegetables that are fine for kids. And so, yeah, kind of like what you were saying, there is no roadmap. And the best way to figure out your own roadmap, though, and your own path is to give a lot of stuff a try and figure out what is working, what's working, not just for you commercially, but what feels good. And kind of like to bring it full circle with our conversation. But with that pivot, like maybe there are some years where you're doing, and this is what's happened for me. Like there are years where I do more commercially viable work and I stumble across something that starts to make a lot of money and that's cool. But then maybe I'm like chasing more and more money. And then I'm like, wait, got to reel it back and like pivot over to this and work on some more like personal projects. And I think that the idea of like the perfect work-life balance doesn't exist. It's different for everybody and it will ebb and flow at different times. I met Jessica Hish this year and totally geeked out and we had a really great chat. And she was talking about having to just kind of readjust as you go. And she talked about this concept called, what was it? Tarzaning, where there is no, like you said, there's no roadmap, but what you basically just need to do is grab onto the closest thing, like the closest vine next to you, grab onto it, swing wherever you go, and then grab onto the next one. And that's really, it doesn't sound like a very reassuring thing to do, but that's really what you have to do. But the most important part is that you get onto a vine and like start swinging. I think what's hard is people like to know the entire roadmap and the game plan and the blueprint before they take the first step. And that's not usually how it works because you never know what you're going to stumble across either. Like,
right, you have to trust that next vine is going to be there. You may not have found it yet, but it's going to be there and it will be because you'll figure something out along the way. Yeah,
Yes, totally.
it's a lot of internal faith, which I think is part of the hardest thing. And then I think the other thing to that is like you can't, I don't think there's a time, associated with any of that. Like you shouldn't wait X amount of time to switch, or you shouldn't, if you're 54 and just figuring out you like working with letters, like do it. Like there's no time constraint to any of these things anymore where like you had to like earn your keep to even begin. Like that's not, I don't think there's a barrier to entry in that respect, especially in the creative realm anymore. With all the access to like free tools and the internet, or even none of that, like just being able to have access to people, to be
Oh
able to go, hey,
yeah.
can I watch you do something? There's so many people out there now that just want to show you how they did it. Right. And it's that old concept of like, you can bring the horse to water, you can't force him to drink. So I'll show you like all my inner workings, my books, my contracts, my work, how I did stuff for clients, how I do stuff at the day job, whatever. It doesn't mean I'm going to lose anything because of it. There's too many people out there that are going to do it differently. Even if you did copy my exact process, it's not going to look the same. And that's fine. And that's better.
Right.
But
yeah, it's very, very true.
cool. Well, I have one question left.
Yeah.
We'll look into the
Let's do
chat to see if there's anything there. So this is not, so to get off of the working stuff, right? I think this is a cool thing I'm trying to use to like wrap up. So you're, making that dress, you have this awesome like dyed blouse on, you've got tattoos. Like what is the art that draws your eye, right? Like what is the thing that you're like walking down the street, like, oh, that's cool. Not necessarily something you want to make or something that like you are channeling in, but other things like, and I don't mean like what inspires you. I mean, literally what you're drawn to, because I think that's two different things. Like I can look at 100 people's work and be like, I'm going to steal these aspects. But like I was in, walking around the city like last week and I was like, that's just really cool looking. Like it had nothing to do, with design really. It wasn't even put there intentionally. It was just like a accidental arrangement of shit. And I was like, oh, it looks really gnarly. And like, that was that. So are there things like that for you that you can identify?
I think the only thing I've been able to identify over the years is I like lots of colors and I like big round shapes. Maybe that's kind of why I'm wearing this blouse. But yeah, I forget who I was talking with earlier this year, but yeah, like the art that you're drawn to or like what you would decorate your house with isn't necessarily like you said, the kind of work you'd want to emulate. Right. It's like very different. And also just whatever purpose the design is going to serve, I guess, in your life. But yeah, for me, it's always been kind of big and like chunky, round kind of shapes, I would say. I don't really know why, but that's just kind of been the thing. I've always been drawn to like handmade looking things. Like I like when things look like they are a little bit imperfect or they were kind of stamped by like a hand or like made by hand. Speaking of making things by hand and not work, I've been one of my goals for 2019, and I've already gotten the ball rolling on it. This is secret information, but it's really funny. On the note of not working, I want to learn how to make everything in my pantry. Like I'm thinking like almond milk, tofu, peanut butter, like anything that I buy at the grocery store. I want to learn how to make, and it's my goal to try to make all of my food for next year, pending like the occasional restaurant meal. And so on Black Friday, I got super drunk and didn't buy food. I mean, didn't buy like clothing and electronics. Instead, I went down this rabbit hole of doing all this research on how to bulk buy like food for a year. And basically, my apartment looks like I'm a doomsdayer, and like I've got like 300 pounds of like dried food in the corner of it. And I am so excited. I bought lentils and chickpeas and rice and flour and all this stuff.
2020, you're living in the forest in a box with like a battery pack.
I know, right?
And a satellite phone.
And they're gonna be, in 5 years, they're gonna be like, hey, whatever happened to that Hom Sweet Hom chick? I could have sworn she was like an up and coming designer.
That's great. That's cool though. You gotta have those like weird micro passions. And I think cooking is so much fun.
Cooking is my favorite creative exercise because my business brain is not on, but I get to make something and like follow a process, but also be creative and experiment. And then the end product I get to like actually eat, which is really nice. And there's something really nice about, I don't know, like even though you can say that nutritionally store-bought piece of bread versus a piece of bread you make is the same, there's just so much more work that goes into it that feels nice. And that's actually probably the best way that I unplug is to cook. And it's honestly perfect for me too, because it's like a practical kind of tune out thing. Like some people like to zone out with like a movie marathon, and that's totally fine too, 100% okay. But for me, I just like cook up a storm with my 300 pounds of lentils. I have 25 pounds of everything, just if anyone's curious.
That's fantastic. So are you like the recipe type, or you like to just kind of wing it? Like you see something, you're like, I'm just going to make that and figure it out as you go.
I will 50-50. I usually look up like a base recipe if I don't know what's in something, but then I'll just kind of figure out how to make it. I'm a big believer that anything that I see, or I don't know what it is about me or my upbringing, but I'll see something and be like, I wonder how that was made. I bet I could figure it out. Like I actually have a good example here. I normally don't have this at home, but I'll show you because it'll be fun for people to see. So I'm not going to show it yet. I was up like a couple miles above here, and I walked up by an ice cream store that had like a giant soft serve cone, like a, I don't know, plaster or cement one. And I went in and they didn't have any soft serve. They actually just sold regular ice cream. And I was like, you have the wrong cone, outside that, because I wanted soft serve. And so but based off of that, I went home and I was like, it was a cute soft serve cone though. Someone got paid to make that like 50 years ago. That's a pretty sweet gig.
I know where this is going.
And so I carved It's like 3 feet tall.
Please attach that outside your window. So just like, and put like some like LEDs in it and let people think you're running like an ice cream bar.
Oh my gosh, I would love to do that, but I honestly didn't know how to make it. And so I just started looking up, obviously you can't just Google how to make a giant ice cream cone. And so I ended up looking up how to make giant props and like stage stuff. And I ended up, I kid you not, this is why I love the internet. I ended up watching a bunch of cosplay tutorials on how to make like, hammers and like big horns and like stuff that people wear at Comic-Con that are lightweight, but like solid. And I ended up using this technique that it's a cardboard base that I built out of like old boxes. But then you use that like the stuff you insulate your house with, gap filler. It like is that sticky foam stuff that expands and like fills in any cracks in your walls. I bought a bunch of cans of that, and you just spray the shit out of like your mold, and then it puffs up and then hardens. And then I took an X-Acto knife and carved it down into that shape, and then covered it in plaster. And the next step is to sand it down and then paint it. And now I can run an ice cream store.
Your credit card company has got to be like, what the fuck is she doing?
Oh my gosh, my
stuff, lentils and what paint? Like, what is happening in this woman's life?
Oh my gosh, my bookkeeper is always like, so can you clarify this one? I'm like, what category is that? I'm like, is that a business success?
So funny. That's great.
But yeah, that's just kind of how my mind works. And I think I try to encourage everyone to, even if they don't feel this way, try to think in that way of seeing something that you like, that you're gravitating towards, and just know that if you wanted to, you could figure out how to make it if you wanted to badly enough. Yeah. And there is something really fun. I think that's why cooking is interesting to me, because there's so many different recipes you can try. And the same thing with design. There are so many different techniques you can learn. That sense of learning a new skill and like not mastering it, but even just figuring it out is really, really addictive. And I think that this has been an interesting point in my career, because I've been doing this for 5 years now, full time. And I've been known as a letterer, and I still love lettering, and it's good. I'm good at it and it's easy for me, but I've mastered it now. Like of course I can keep getting better and still work within it, but it is familiar, I guess. It's like I've been married to lettering for 5 years, and I love it, and I have no intention on breaking up with it, but it is what it is. And I think that I've just been figuring, like this ice cream cone, that dress, like trying to figure out ways to do things that have nothing to do with lettering that maybe will influence my lettering practice, or my creative, like commercial creative practice over the next couple of years. Who knows? I think you just got to go with your gut.
No, you're right. I think a lot of that is, I don't think people realize or acknowledge how much doing those little things will actually influence the way you actually work. Like there's been plenty of times where I've been like putting together some bullshit IKEA furniture, and like I figure out, I'm like, oh, that's how I need to do that thing, and I'll just like stop and go write it down. And for a long time, like even like with unpacking boxes, like I lived in my last residence like maybe 6 years, give or take, and I had boxes that I never unpacked from when I moved in, and that's always because I'll be digging through, unpacking something, I'll find something I meant to put out or whatever, and then I'll be distracted completely by whatever it was, and I'm on it forever. And it's just one of those things. Oh, wait, did we lose you?
Oh, sorry. I just accidentally.
I was like, she disappeared.
I was trying to close a tab and it.
That's funny. Welcome back.
Thank you. I was gonna say you were
funny.
talking about bullshit IKEA furniture, figuring out how to put it together, and then
so I was just saying, there's you find little things that just become other things, and I don't think it's valued in, skill. That I think when you challenge your brain in a different way, whether it be cooking or packing or doodling or whatever it is, it will always bleed over because you like we were talking about earlier, you can't turn off the other side, right? It's just impossible. Mm-hmm. So, but if you can distract it and give it time to process on its own, it becomes, its next evolution.
That's very, very true. Yeah, you have to figure out the activities that kind of put that like crazier creative side or the businessy side of your brain like on rest, on pause. I don't know what the right word is, because it's exhausting to think of everything in a commercial sense or try to monetize everything. I do believe that most anything, if done right, can be monetized. If you find the right audience for it. I think that's what a lot of people struggle with is everyone's got a different flavor of work, and you just have to get it in front of the right audience. And then I think that's kind of like how you build a career, is like figuring out your voice and then figuring out your people and then getting in front of your people.
And that obviously could be 5 people. It may not be hundreds of thousands, which is totally fine.
Yes, it's very, very true. I think back to like hundreds of years ago, or I guess thousands of years ago, when like artists just had like a couple wealthy patrons and like that's how you lived. Like that's so crazy.
Yeah.
And now like I think with social media, like even if you have, I'm trying to think of a realistic number, like if you get up to 1,000 followers, but those 1,000 followers love you and love everything you do, you can carve out a pretty nice little living for yourself, if you figure out the right stuff to make.
I would argue that some of those people are from a monetary perspective, are making more money than some of the folks with hundreds of thousands of followers.
I would agree.
Because you've got that kind of that side note of like, well, just because you have 2.6 million doesn't mean they're buying anything.
It's true. And
that's what supporting you in any way.
That's what I've been thinking about over the years too, is like, I used to think that, definitely like Instagram following rising would mean income rising. And it hasn't been the case for me. It's definitely like, I think in 2015, I made more money than 2016 and I had half the followers. So it really has nothing to do with that. Obviously, the only thing that like is affected by that is if you're selling products directly to your audience. But even then, like, the more followers you get, the less engagement you get. And so it doesn't matter how many people you have, it's how many people see your shit and then want to buy it.
Yeah, I think there's a threshold that, once it hits a certain number, it's like any more doesn't really impact anything. I tell people the same thing. Like, well, how much money would it take for you to stop, working all the time and just do whatever you want to do? And, it's like people are like, well, would you rather earn $100,000 or $200,000? It's like, well, honestly, I probably wouldn't. It sounds like very privileged and shitty, but I probably wouldn't notice the difference, right? I mean, once you hit a certain level of like, it's just a new bracket, whether it be followers, whether it be attention, whatever it is, anything more just becomes part of the blur. Like some things may get easier, right? But there's a point at like, where even if you add, zeros to the end, it's like, it doesn't change generally what you're doing, what you're buying, how you're buying, on a daily basis. That impacts enough.
Yeah, they've done studies on income actually, where the average, I think it's the average U.S. household, or household individual, can't remember, but $70,000 is the mark at which, like, in I think an average city, you can live very comfortably, like, pay your mortgage, like go on a vacation, like go out to eat, and like not live extravagantly, but live well and comfortably without worrying.
Right.
And anything more than that does not affect your happiness whatsoever. They've done like multiple studies that like whether you're making $70,000 or $700,000 a year, you're not that much happier. I mean, you see it again too with like lottery winners and their life like goes in the toilet. Like I don't want to win the lottery because statistically things are not going to turn out well for you in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a sports guy, but you can say something about all the sports people. They get their first bill, out of college, or their first, big NFL or NBA, whatever contract. And you see them buying houses and buying cars, whatever. And then year 2, they're bankrupt, it's like that certain, it's that initial kick where you start changing the way your habits develop, and it becomes a hobby. I could talk about this for hours.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the sense of Instagram followers too, I can say, like, for anyone watching who's like stressed out about how many followers they don't have yet or how many they have, and I started at 0 too. I think I got on Instagram like early 2014 or something, like maybe late 2013, and I definitely, like, once you hit like 100 and then like 200 and 1,000, and it's like, it's exciting, you get that dopamine. But after a certain point, like, I remember once I hit 10K, it just started growing exponentially. There's something weird, like, I guess, and affirming to someone who's new, who's coming to your page, who's like, oh, this person's legit, they have 10K followers, and they automatically press follow. And then, a year or two later, it was at 100, and it hasn't changed anything about my life other than the fact that, like, if anything, it's good in the sense that I have this new channel to reach people, and, like, I can do sponsored posts if I want. However, all it does is probably just give me more anxiety that, like, more people are going to see every little move I make. And it's a cool thing, like, to have. It's aspirational, I understand. But yeah, like, there really isn't anything different about the way my business is run now versus when I had 20,000 followers versus when I had 5,000 followers. It's still pretty much the same deal. And yeah, like you were saying, after a certain point, like after I hit 100, like I'm at, I think, 160 now. There's no difference. It's literally the exact same. If anything, my engagement has just gone down, which honestly is a really fucked up thing that they do, where it's like, you get all this great engagement, and then, like, when you finally get to where you want to go, it just goes.
Well, it's almost like a double check. It's like, this didn't matter as much as you thought it was. And you're like, well, son of a bitch. I've been working so hard to get to this point.
Oh my gosh. Oh, no, that's what I was going to say about Jessica too, is when we met, we were talking about how, like, she was a workaholic in her early 20s. I, like, still feel like I'm a workaholic. I definitely was more so like 3 years ago. And it's hard too, because, like, it's easy in hindsight to say, like, oh, like, I should have like rested more, or like I should practice more self-care. It's always hard for me to give advice though, because I, and like Jessica agreed, we wouldn't have what we have now if we hadn't, like, just worked tirelessly for like 5 years. And now you can kind of take a breather and realize, like, oh, I think I'm kind of stressed. But, like, I don't know. They're, like you were saying, they're generally, I do sway away from kind of like that hustle porn, like grind life kind of thing, 'cause it's not healthy. But I think that being in the, like, bubble that is New York, like, facilitates a lot of that, and you don't necessarily recognize it, especially when you're in a city like that, because everyone else is doing it.
Yeah.
So I really, don't know what the perfect answer. Like you said, there is no perfect answer. There is no roadmap. But yeah.
And I think as people individually develop, and as an industry develops, I mean, you could say that the same thing about, the industry in general. I mean, it used to be like grind, and now people are like, woo, like, people are getting hurt. Like, we need to calm down. And then, then it's being shared, like, look, you can do this. However, know what you're risking or what the consequences are. And I think it's just one of those things, like, as society grows, people are going to catch on. But you're right. I think it's more, you can't, people are like, well, how do I get to where you are? It's like, well, this is what I did,
Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And doesn't mean it's not like the most practical advice 5 or 10 years later, but it's what you actually did, which is why, going to conferences is nice, and hearing other people's stories are nice, because I think it's dangerous to try to model your career after one particular person, but it's good to hear that how 20 or 30 different people found their way at different times in their lives. And maybe if you take a couple pieces from that person and a couple pieces from that person, and whoever's story you resonate with, like, some people's stories too, like, you might be like, oh shit, I don't want to do that. Like, if that's what you had to do to get where you are, like, I don't want to be a partner at Pentagram or whatever it is, like,
you're right.
Who knows? And, like, some people, like, I was just talking to my boyfriend about this. I don't know if you listen to NPR's How I Built This.
On occasion, yeah.
And it's so funny too, because half the episodes are like these intense stories about grinding and, like, debt and, like, sleepless nights. And then my favorite episodes are the ones where he's interviewing them and they're just like, I don't know, it just kind of worked. Like, I made a thing and then people bought it.
Yeah, it's like, just sat on the couch one day and boom.
Yeah,
like, you son of a bitch.
It really is that random. Like, hard work can get you very far, but there are some things that just kind of happen. I always tell people too, like, take my career with a grain of salt, because very few people graduate college with a $25,000 book deal. Like, that was not a normal, like, I worked hard to achieve this goal situation like that. Yes, I came up with a good idea at a good time and I made it. That was an important part. I put it out in the world, but I had no idea. And those were not my intentions to like go pursue those things. Like, and they don't have to be yours too. Like, you are not a failure if you don't achieve any of those milestones that some of your favorite designers did at certain points. Everyone finds it differently. Like, one of my favorite people that I've been following lately is Lisa Congdon. She's an illustrator, and she didn't start painting professionally like till much later in life. I think in her 40s or 50s, and you know, it was just a hobby before. And I'm always curious when I love hearing stories like that, because maybe in 20 years, one of my weird hobbies now will be my job, and lettering will be a thing that I did in my 20s. Who knows?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it boils it down to like, make the thing, right? Because whatever it is, just make it. You know, get ready for the vine, embrace the pivot, whatever you want to, however you want to phrase it, but get ready for the next thing when it comes up, and have the courage, if you can, to grab it, you know, because
I thought you were going to say, get ready for the vine, as in like Vine, the platform that disappeared.
What, first of all, what happened to Vine, right? That was so much fun.
Well, I have to plug my computer in 1 second, but keep talking.
But no, but I think it circles back to what you're saying, right? It's time is relative, right? So it doesn't mean you start now, you start later, however much time you put in, it doesn't matter. It's going to happen when it happens, and that's kind of it. And then committing to making, right, whatever that thing is, and then being able to understand that like you may have to change that down the road, whether that be changing your position on something, whether that be changing your skill set, whatever, and just embracing that little trifecta is going to be the way to just kind of ride it out and see what happens.
Oh yeah, I was chatting with one of my girlfriends the other day about. She had texted me. She was like, "Have you seen like an uptick in Instagram ads? Like, it seems like every 3 posts are ads right now." And she was like, "It's so frustrating. Like, she's like, it feels like Facebook is just basically trying to like make a quick buck off of Instagram, and it'll just kind of like be a dead platform in a year or two because it's so ad heavy." And I was like, I can't even imagine a world, at least my world, where Instagram isn't a thing. But it's very true that like I had friends who in like, I'd say the early, like maybe 2008, 2009, like garnered very big Facebook followings for their pages. And now those followings, even though they've got 200, 300,000 people, their engagement isn't very good. Like, it isn't necessarily a super viable place for them to post their work. I guess it depends on what kind of content you're posting. I think people who do video seem to be doing pretty well if they do have that follower base. And that's been on my list of things to do for such a long time, is do more video stuff, maybe get on YouTube. I don't know why I've always resisted. I don't want to be a YouTuber, but then again, I never wanted to be an Instagrammer either. So like, I just got to get over the hump.
Well, what's nice is the tools are becoming more cross-compatible, right? You can make something for one of the platforms and then post it on all, which is super helpful. I mean, I remember back when like I used to sell my friends like MySpace templates that we were putting together. Like,
I know.
Like, that was the thing, you know, and then that MySpace imploded, and then it was like, oh, Facebook's the next one, but you can't do anything fun on it. And I'm like, well, there goes like my lunch money idea. Like, I'm screwed. But you're right. I think part of it's like, you got to think like, what happens if Instagram goes away? You know, like, is your structure viable? And you know what, putting that aside, is your enjoyment in what you're doing based on the feedback you're getting on Instagram, or is in the making the thing? And if it's the latter, then you're going to be fine, right? It doesn't matter the platform. Another one will come up, it'll be popular, it'll get some traction, and then in a year later, it's going to be the thing, and then 6 years later, it's gone again. But
that's actually really true. And like, thinking about like, if you could be popular on one platform, there's nothing stopping you from becoming popular on the next thing, whatever it may be. And I've thought about that a lot now that we're kind of reflecting on 2018, because it's the end of the year. Like, I remember someone telling me like, you know, don't put all your eggs in a specific social media platform because it could be gone. And my business coach had asked me, she was like, where would your people find you if Instagram was gone tomorrow morning? You open up your phone and it was gone. Like, do you have a way to reach people? Like, they can come to your website if they can remember it, and they'll come find you, read your blog post, but how do you send a message to them without Instagram? And I was like, I don't know. Like, and so that was honestly the like inspiration behind starting the Homework Challenge, is so I could start building an email list and getting people to voluntarily give me their email address so I could send them hopefully something useful once a week, even if they're not opening all of them or doing all of them, just so if and when, Instagram or Facebook or whatever it may be kind of implodes and then falls flat, I have, at least something. I think that I've been thinking a lot more about putting more of my eggs in, like email lists, but also just like my own website, posting more content on my website as opposed to Instagram. If I could get people used to checking my blog once a week instead of my Instagram page, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because I feel like websites now are basically like your storefront and they're not going anywhere. Hopefully, I don't know. I have no idea. My boyfriend's been doing a lot of research into like SEO stuff for his business lately, and I never even like read a single word on SEO. But one of the like byproducts of doing side projects that get shared around the internet is you build SEO. I had no idea.
You have some clout, yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. No, you're right. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you have to have something central, and it's hard to commit to something central because you don't know what's going to be there, right? Is it an email address? Is it a website? Whatever. I mean, thankfully, everything we have thus far exists on the web. So, like, it seems like a website's the safest platform, but you're right. Who knows? It could be nothing.
Well, you know what's crazy? If you have some free time this week, you should listen to the How I Built This interview with the guy who started BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed was started from an email forward chain. I kid you not. Yes, he started writing these joke emails that he would send to his friends. And this is before like the internet was a really big thing. And they would just become these like emails that got forwarded like thousands of times. Enough so that he ended up getting on like, I think like the Today Show or something because of an email he had sent that was forwarded so many times. And that mentality of that shareability is what started BuzzFeed, which is so nuts.
That's crazy. Think about all the bullshit chain emails I've gotten like over. Like, I know. Send this, or your mother's gonna, get a third leg by tomorrow. It's like, okay, fine, I'll send it. And that starts BuzzFeed. That's depressing.
No, it wasn't one of those. He had trolled Nike and then like wrote an email about it to his friends. Because the backstory was, I think back in some early 2000s, there was a website where you could customize your new Nikes with whatever phrase you wanted, like up to a certain amount of characters. And he tried, typing in like fuck and shit. And like, there were certain like flagged words, and he was trying to figure out what words were flagged and what words weren't flagged. And he ended up typing in, I think, child labor or sweatshop. He typed in sweatshop and it got approved. And so he ordered a pair of Nikes that said sweatshop on them. And he got contacted by a rep from Nike being like, oh, sorry, there was a glitch. Like, you actually can't do that. And he was like, why? And they were like, they couldn't give him a good reason why. And so he basically took all of the transcription of the conversation and put it in an email, and it went viral, email forward wise, which seems so antiquated.
Good for him. That's awesome. Yeah. It's like we were saying, this one of those things that just worked, It's like, well, son of a bitch.
If he had just stopped there and like written one funny email that went viral, it could have just been that. Totally. But picking up on shit like that, where you're like, oh, this has legs, or people think this is funny, or people are sharing this, maybe I should do more of that, or maybe it'll work again. So let me try to replicate that. And it takes a little bit of experimenting, but that's what I did with my passion projects. Daily Dishonesty was a surprise. And then I tried doing it again with Ex-Boyfriend Tears after I went through a breakup, and that worked. And then I did Will Letter for Lunch, and that worked. And I was like, wait, does this work? Like, is there a format for these like kind of bite-sized Tumblr blogs? And there totally is.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think it's a combination of like combining because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have time for it. It's like, you kind of do, because if you take something that's bothering you, like a breakup, right, or something like that, and just channel it into this, like combining the time, all of a sudden there's like a gateway that opens, right? It's like, you're not setting an hour aside to doodle, but you're then using, maybe it's like, I mean, Lisa Quine, you saw like she used to just draw lyrics of songs she was listening to, like combining something she was doing with whatever was going on at the time. And all of a sudden it opened a whole new pathway that's now her career. Like same thing, along the same lines. I mean, it's just combining small details together that just seem unrelated can open a million doors.
Oh, 100%. I always liken it to experimenting with different like combinations of food. Like, whoever invented chicken and waffles, or like figs and prosciutto, or whatever, like these kind of combinations that you wouldn't think were delicious. When someone first told me about chicken and waffles in high school, I was like, hell no, like that will not go in my mouth.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah. And you really don't know until that one weird person tries it and they're like, this is delicious. And then tells a friend about it. And then it kind of goes from there.
That's over.
Yeah,
that's
very
great.
true.
Well, cool. Well, we are well over what I told you to be on. I mean, I'm cool with it, but thank you so much for spending time with us.
Of course.
I think we're going to wrap this one up. So if everyone, thank you so much, Lauren, for all of your insight and conversational knowledge. I hope everyone can get a chance to rewatch the parts they liked. It posts within 24 hours on the channel, so it's already done. Don't have to worry about it. And keep in mind that we will always check the live stream chat as we go for questions that I've kind of thrown in, as we've talked about stuff. And keep up with our next live stream. We hope to have you in Raleigh soon to do something.
I would love to.
I don't know when that'll work out, but we'll figure it out. But cool. Well, thanks everybody. And thanks, Lauren. And we'll see you next month.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Bye.